Because last year it was so hard to man, we had to double up and triple up, and it was more work than, so, and I don't think it was really, I mean, you know, yeah, you had to practically beg people to come
Yeah,
and
they
take
just want to freeze
stuff,
them.
and, yeah,
I get
I
it.
just don't see a purpose. MPO is gonna have a booth, so if we had any vital, good like, I gave Eric the other day all the rest of the Safe to Tell stuff, and if we have something we want out, they will gladly put it out for distribution for us on the MPO too. So, and if somebody can't walk it, but they want to be, I think you could ride in the passenger side and wave. I mean, you could do that. Or you could ride in probably in the back of the truck and wave. Can't you, sitting down or whatever? I mean,
I'd have to refer to our parade rules.
I can't remember, but they're gonna have, people are gonna be on floats still and
Right,
things. and
right.
passengers.
So we're not allowing any candy to be thrown from moving vehicles, so you have to be out on the ground.
Right.
So if you want
can't
to
do that.
ride,
But it could be inside waving. I mean, if
You
you
sure-
want to
you
just
sure
be
could.
there to have a presence, you could do that.
you should do.
You can't get on or off moving vehicle
Nope.
at all.
Right.
Right, that's what I thought.
Even if the vehicle is stopped.
Right, you still stay on the vehicle, on or off.
So is everybody else gonna be here and walking?
What time is the parade actually?
9.
It starts at 9.
And we're-
9 to 11, right, or 9 to 11?
Well,
It's
not
2
for
hours,
us.
yeah, it's 2 hours.
2 hours.
Well, we don't take 2 hours.
Oh, no.
We're,
We'll walk through in about, I don't know, maybe an hour, depending.
that's-
I don't think it'll be quite as slow, I don't know. So we just know if we have enough, I mean, we may have to get a few other folks to help us hand out candy, I don't know, because, so we can avoid maybe having to have wagons. Or even with wagons, we might need a couple of people. Because you have to be really close to the kids when passing the candy out, so.
Well, what we just need to, I think, the chief, just have him stop at every block now to get ahead of the group.
Yeah. Is everybody gonna be here then? See everybody?
my plan.
So we got 7 people,
Okay.
all walking? That ought to be more than plenty of us covering a block. Okay?
Good. Good. And Terry said he's on his way.
Okay. Unless we have time to future meetings.
I think he's like gonna show up as a street sweeper or something, a truck.
And road name, grand entrance. I came in the back truck.
Oh,
Yeah.
Were you there? I thought I saw your kid,
in
Mike.
Boston, I got my Texas. You know, he could be anywhere.
Was he there?
Texas names.
He's only 8, so he might have hitched a ride or something. I don't know.
You were going to Texas to check out.
When did that?
Shopping.
I don't think he was there.
Seriously, he hasn't, yeah.
He
I
might
even
have.
asked the kid, I
Did you
go,
take a picture?
I even asked the kid, I go, where's your dad? Oh, he's over there.
You
I
probably
don't know for
said,
sure,
"Oh,
but
you're going to jail."
he looks so much like
For
him.
her to see that thing and for me to go to the Baylor.
I finally figured out he's probably with some friends, but then I'm like, well, maybe he's got a twin.
They're not all that.
Yeah. I had a guy who was like leading this guy Cortez.
They're all, no, this kid looks exactly like him, I don't know whose kid it was.
Into switches,
And he could pass
so
for
you're
your
meeting
kid.
this group that's really into like electric switches, and they like put them into all these old villages, and really, and he was like with a group, there was like, you know, like 12 people, and so I'm thinking he's gonna tell me about the Basilica or whatever, and he's like, oh yeah, these switches. I'm glad you're facility maintenance, you're in the right field, you know, right?
Pretty specific.
Yes, yes, your vacation is still not quite as,
Yeah, I think a Baylor football game is better than switches.
I don't even know if they're having, did they get enough people to do bingo this year, or they're not having bingo either, right? Lions Club didn't have enough members, and if you don't have members to call, so I don't know if they got enough members to
Well, you have to
have
be a
one or
member
not.
to.
When they're here for the budget request, he brought that up and said that it was on the fence, but I haven't heard.
That would be pretty huge if they didn't, that's a big draw.
You had to get a car. And that you have a
Why are you asking about Larimer County taxes?
State taxes. He was asking about state taxes.
Well, I did ask about what Laramie charges now.
Yeah.
0.8, right?
Well,
And
I
that's, is
didn't
that their
know.
open space tax or whatever?
Open space is .25.
At point what?
25?
I didn't look at the attachment.
Yeah, their open
Did you
space.
see the fiasco with their new tax assessor? They've had more, more property complaints.
The
ever in
dean
the
says
history.
Laramie is 0.8.
They may be,
What's
that
the
may
rest of it?
consist of other things.
Oh, that's probably the mental health, is that in there too?
It would be.
Yeah.
Are you guys referring to something that Larimer's statutory .8
Yeah.
sales tax?
So we pass this, we'd be up to almost 8%, right?
Why, thank you, sir.
Is state 3%?
Yeah, state's
State's
2.9.
2.9.
2.9.
Okay, so we'd be up pretty close to 8.
Now.
Yeah, and we could get, so was the mental health, was that a half cent?
Yes.
So half cent there, and I thought it was a quarter cent for open space, maybe it's 0.3%. I just don't know what the other.
There's,
would be.
Did the ranch pass it, did they pass a tax with the ranch as well?
They extended it.
Extended?
It was expired that the,
Yeah, I saw the plans out there. They're like redoing the whole thing. Another convention center and another hotel.
Oh, for the-
New arena,
for the brands.
hockey.
69.
No, that's not even.
That's not part of the
That's not
ranch,
part of the
no?
ranch.
That's-
It's part of the, just like the convention center, or, you know,
Oh, yeah.
the complex and everything that's gonna go out there. We saw a whole presentation on that. I can't remember if it was this board, or it was the DDA board that saw that.
DDA, I think.
A new height, a new ice, big ice, indoor ice
Mhm.
arena. So see, I think Larimer County.
Larimer was looking at doing like 3 sheets of ice for youth hockey. And they wanted, said they wanted to manage it like professional sports. They put basketball floor over the ice. And then do like youth basketball tournaments in the same arena. Kind of like when the Nuggets play, you know, that
Oh,
whole
yeah.
ice is under the court.
20 here, this has 27, 2018, so a little bit of tax involved.
After this, I want to, just tonight, quick update on my meeting with,
Yeah, I saw Ryan. Second cross. Okay. Sure. Mayor, where would you like our guests from Larimer County?
Maybe up front, but we'll need another
Can I have a chair?
chair. Please come up front, Commissioner. Nice to see you too.
So John, do you think they're gonna go
Nice
after
to
us
see
or
you.
something?
Oh, sir, how are you?
Yeah.
See you. I'm Paul.
We gotta get started with this one then?
yes.
Okay, so we're gonna call our town board work session to order this evening for August 19th, 2019. And we are going to start this evening with the Regional Transportation Task Force meeting follow-up. We have some special guests from Larimer County this evening, so I'll let you introduce yourselves, and then we'll go around and introduce ourselves to you all.
Thank you. Good evening, I'm Lori Cadridge, and I'm the interim director for READY, Community Planning and Infrastructure Resources for the County of Larimer.
Ken Cooper, Facilities Director for the county.
John Kafalas, District 1 County Commissioner, on the job now for about 7 months, learning a lot.
Ken Bennett, Mayor Pro Tem, Windsor.
Miles Baker, Windsor Town Board.
David Soslowski, Windsor Town Board.
Ian McCarter, Town Attorney.
Mr. Neal, Town Manager?
Certainly.
Barry Wilson, Town Board.
Tom Jones, Town Board.
Christy Melendez, Mayor of Windsor.
Paul Redemeyer, Windsor Town Board.
And then why don't we go ahead and introduce who we have?
Curtis Templeman, I'm the civil engineer. I've been the town rep for the TAC for Laramie County.
Great.
Scott Bolstead, Windsor Planning.
Janine Hageman, Windsor Stormwater.
Terry Walker, Director of Public Works.
Okay. So with that, we'll let you get started, and we're anxious to hear about your presentation.
So Mayor, if you might give us a clue, we've done these presentations a few times, and sometimes we do questions and answers as we're going through the presentation. Sometimes the board prefers that we go through the entire presentation and then take questions and answers, so do you have a preference tonight?
I think whatever you would like to do.
I think we're comfortable taking questions as they come up.
Okay.
That way somebody doesn't have to try to remember it
Okay.
to the end.
That sounds great, thank you.
So I think I started. Make sure I got this. All right, Ken,
Is it not,
I might be at the right angle.
I can advance it?
Thank you. There's 4 things we want to cover.
Is it frozen there?
I think so.
Let me see if I can find it, because we were having.
Okay. I think I can get started without it if you don't mind. Sure. The most important thing, or the most important reason we're here tonight is to make sure that everybody on the town board and those affected by the potential for the county to advance a half-penny tax is aware of where we're at right now in the process. Some of you have been working for almost 2 years to help us out in this space, and we really appreciate it. And we started with one plan, and that's evolved over especially the last few months, and we want to make sure that everyone is aware of where we're at today and answer any questions that you might have about how we got here. So we're going to describe the current situation, give you an idea of what's been done, what's being considered, and the next steps. And Ken is going to cover facility stuff, and I'm going to cover transportation stuff. And I'm sure this is no surprise to the Windsor Board or to those who live in Windsor that survey results from nearly every community in this region show that transportation is a high priority. And one of the key issues we've learned through our journey is just how many people are commuting in between jurisdictions within Larimer County to work. Even in Fort Collins, the recent survey data is 50% of those who are working in Fort Collins are commuting elsewhere. Living in Fort Collins are commuting elsewhere to work. Conversely, you have that population coming in to work as well. It goes up higher in Loveland, it's 75%. And I believe, Shane, that you've mentioned it's even higher in Windsor from the last survey.
And I think in Wellington, if I may, it's something like
it's 92%
92% of the people
Yeah.
who live in Wellington travel outside of Wellington for their jobs.
And so, as we've looked at the data, we really feel like these regional connecting routes are vitally important to accommodate this commuter traffic, and it's resulting in a lot of frustration by those people who are living and working in our communities. And in addition to that, we are also seeing in some communities, right, where housing costs are driving people away from the community. They can no longer afford to live there. Estes Park, I think, has experienced this way before some of the rest of us. And so that is as well adding to this kind of daily commuter traffic to areas.
On the facility side, the county went through about a 1-year process to create a facilities master plan that was adopted by the commissioners in the early part of 2018. That was done basically in 2 sections, one on the criminal justice side, and then the other was kind of all the other county needs. And the reason for that was that the commissioners saw the jail, the county jail, as not a priority, but really the priority, as the need to address that. The overcrowding, we're sending, or have been sending, a good number of inmates to Washington County. Pretty expensive and not a sustainable plan. So the master plan wrapped up in 2018. Unfortunately, it allows for, calls for about almost $600 million in investment across the 20-year window. But the tough part is that in the first 5-year window, almost 2/3 of that cost, almost $400 million, is identified. That includes a number of projects that are included in this suggested funding plan. Roughly $120 million would be required to expand the Justice Center downtown, so that basically the courthouse building. We need to almost double the size of that building. So that's a very, very big project. It's identified and wrapped up in this measure. In addition to that, and it's related to the other numbers of criminal justice pieces, the Community Corrections Program and Alternative Sentencing Program. Community Corrections, again, is the alternative sentencing arm for convicted felons, and alternative sentencing is for misdemeanor clients. And the upside of improving and expanding those programs is that it allows for those citizens, those convicted citizens to pay back society without necessarily leaving their homes, without necessarily leaving their jobs. Keeps them intact and present, potentially with their families. Doesn't send them off to jail or to prison, and allows for that to be expanded upon, and really serves a great piece back to the society. The veteran piece as well is rolled into this, and then also human services. And again, these are county-wide, regional needs that are addressed. Albeit, the majority of those facilities are in Fort Collins and would be expanded in Fort Collins, but those are county-wide needs and services that are identified and roll into this. So, in terms of where we are, sorry, yes.
Oh, I was going to interrupt.
Yeah.
Community corrections is basically a halfway house.
Yeah.
The state is talking about closing some prisons and shifting more Colorado prisoners to halfway houses. How does that impact Larimer County?
It could, and it probably
it's
will.
One of the few county operated.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, the majority of them are privatized.
If I may, we're
Sure.
one of 3
Yeah.
counties that are on our own community corrections program. And, one of the things I wanted to just clarify with what Ken said, none of the money from this proposed increase of the county sales and use tax would go for the jail expansion. That's already been covered. That's a $75 million capital investment. We've determined that we're not asking the voters for that. That has to be figured out a financing mechanism, certificates of participation. So that's happening, that's moving forward. Here we're talking about expanding the capacity for alternative sentencing corrections, and that's a way of diverting people from incarceration, which oftentimes does not meet their needs and adds to, it's more expensive to have people in the jail.
Right. So let me ask kind of a tangential question. I think it was based on something you said. So I get that a lot of county services are in Fort Collins. That's a population center. That's a county seat. Have the commissioners considered taking some of these services and spreading them out on Larimer County?
It's actually happened. The Loveland building that we opened and paid without having to raise taxes. So that again, per John's message, that is not part of this proposal. That was done, previous to it. Almost $20 million that was invested in Loveland. That included health and human services, motor vehicle, clerk and recorder. There's a sheriff's presence there as well. The workforce center is identified and served out of there. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, the commissioners have seen that as a priority, and certainly for the southern part of the county have addressed that, with that new building. So.
And if I may just add to that, I think they certainly opened a conversation about whether if we're successful in these additional resources, how we might expand some of the capacity, for example, at the Loveland campus, which of course would be closer to Windsor. I think those are. I think we need to be creative, in terms of the facility needs. And the other thing, just to make sure it's clear, because it gets confused by the general public, that when we talk about the courthouse, we're not talking about where I hang out. We're talking about where the judges hang out. And that's another way of trying to help address some of our criminal justice needs. If we can expedite everything from, child welfare cases, child support, criminal matters, and that helps the whole system. But that's what we're talking about, is the Justice Center at 201 LaPorte Avenue.
We're also working cooperatively with Loveland to expand the Loveland Police and Courts building to bring community corrections and ASD presence down in there in that facility as well. So those are ongoing efforts that give a yes to your question in terms of what the commissioner is pushing, or commissioners have agreed to support.
It seems like some of the questions that we're hearing at this point are similar to what we've heard at some of the other boards, which is, what has the county been doing with its increased amount of money it's getting from property tax? Why is it going out? Why are we asking for more money now? And there's a litany of projects that have been funded through the increased property tax, not the least of which is the jail. So maybe you could wrap that into one.
Yeah, in terms of what came out the other end of the master plan, the jail expansion, $75 million, right? It's an improvement primarily, but it's also an expansion to allow for more beds. There are 3 primary fleet facilities, Estes Park Satellite Facility, Livermore Satellite Facility, and then eventually, when we find land, we'll be vacating and building a new fleet central campus. Right now, that's on Vine Street on the north side of Fort Collins. And the police and courts building, that expansion, also we're extending resources. So we're chasing almost $150 million in capital construction, if you roll all those together. And that's all in addition to what this program would allow for. And again, that starts to get to the number that, that first 5-year window of our master plan, almost 400 million, addresses. So those are, there's a whole host of needs. We're tackling a good number of them. I've not been anywhere in any organization after a facilities master plan that acted so quickly. It's been really terrific to see the county wrap up and, engage like that and begin to move forward. We're through early schematic design in the jail project. That project will be completing design early next year, constructing for about 2-year window. And again, that's a $75 million project. Police and courts is actively, moving. We're already into construction. That'll be done the early part of 2020. The Loveland building was wrapped up and moved into it in September of 18. That's about a 50,000 square foot facility. There's a whole host of. The one thing that we haven't talked about is at the Justice Center, and again, this is, to be clear, that's the building north of the county courthouse office building. It's very confusing. But the courthouse itself, right, where district court operates out of, we had to move probation out of that building, and you might have seen articles in the paper, but to have to construct one courtroom, it's costing the county about $5 million to get one more in there, because we had to move a whole group out, had to have a long-term lease on a facility. It worked out very well, actually, given the constraints, but it speaks to the fact that we're kind of right up against the wall now in that building, and
It speaks to your point about what the state does in access. Yes.
Right.
So if you have so many facility needs in the first 5 years, do you plan to bond against the tax if you get it? How would you finance that?
That's certainly going to be considered, yeah. It'll depend on a whole host of variables, I think, depending upon what comes out the other end of this election. So, assuming it makes it into the ballot.
Shane, at least what I've heard from Linda is there's not a lot of bonding capacity left.
I see.
Because especially after the jail project went forward, so even some of what we talked about early on for the regional road projects were that possibly the county could do some of that bonding, but then when the county's position shifted for the jail to bond that, there's not as much capacity there as we thought. So we're looking more towards other agencies being able to use that revenue stream to do their own bonding for some of the larger projects.
Because we're talking about 2 different things. So I was talking facility specific.
Right.
I understand the transportation side, but I wondered on the county's facility specifically.
Yeah, I think last I heard it was cash flow.
That's my understanding, and I can certainly follow up, Shane, in terms of, we've just the other day received what I think is the final ballot language of this proposal, and actually it's August 27th, which I think is next week.
Mm-hmm.
Time flies when you're having fun. But at that administrative matters meeting on Tuesday morning is when we will consider a resolution that if we approve the resolution, this thing would go to the ballot. And I don't believe that in the ballot language there is language around the ability to bond. I think on the facility side, it's like what the director said. But certainly we should follow up, make sure to verify that.
Okay,
The memo you sent us actually said, if it's current, says there's no bonding question on the ballot. So you'd have to go back to the voters if you did want to issue.
Yes.
I guess when I read the memo, what jumped out at me, or all I saw was the transit part, or the transportation part of it. I saw the facilities, but it really didn't get into what facilities were, corrections, obviously now. Have you tried a tax just for corrections before? Have you had a ballot issue on that?
Well, the county, you're talking about community corrections, that
Well, what you're
specifically,
saying is
or?
the biggest need over there.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the jail, or are you talking about community corrections and alternatives?
Well, whatever you're using your 35%
Yeah,
here for.
thank you. Yeah, the short answer is we've addressed the most recent alternative sentencing building, and that was done without raising taxes. That building is about 10 years old, heading toward. And the other buildings that we talked about in Loveland are also being done without going back and asking for more money to support that. So I believe there were sales tax dollars attached to the community, or the alternative sentencing building back in 2010, roughly, 2011, I think it opened. But it didn't require, ballot language I think that's answering your question, so.
So you feel combining that with transportation is probably gives it a little more chance of passing?
Yeah, it speaks to the host of needs, right? I think that, I think that the short answer to your question is yes. I think that the needs are collectively met to, meant to address full-blown county needs. I think if you polled people around the community and asked, would you rather have roads or would you rather have facilities, I think most people would say they'd rather have roads, right? They're driving them every day, but there's a need for these services, and the facilities are there to support these expanded services. So it's a difficult question to answer straight up, but I think that, if you went forward and asked people individually which they prefer to see, I think you'd have that answer on the transportation side.
And it's important to note, I think this is important, that in the original iteration of this proposal, the split of the revenue, which on a 0.5% increase would be approximately $32 million a year, the original split was 50-50. But then we heard back from jurisdictions, municipalities, et cetera, that transportation was a higher priority. And so we did the 65-35. And then we also, within that transportation, we also determined that 15 to 20% of that could go for transit and multimodal options.
This conversation just took us through 3 slides. This is awesome.
Do you have other questions on the facility side? You had a good number of very good questions about it. We'll move back into the transportation piece, Lauren.
Well, this is more just showing what Commissioner Cavallos was discussing, is how the project has changed from 2/4 cent taxes, full quarter cent headed for county facilities, and 1/4 cent for transportation. And then as we began to visit with people, the needs on the transportation side seemed far greater than what people desired for the facility side. And so the proposal was modified. We think we have a great proposal, if the board is willing to consider it. The one thing that was unanimous throughout the region, I think, is the commitment towards the continued expansion of I-25. And so right off the top, if this is passed, $10 million will be set aside like we had for the first stage of I-25 that could then be used to match monies or leverage projects in that area. Then, yes.
There's no current plan for that expansion, though, right? This is to have money available if the state.
Yeah, there's a current plan for
There is a
expansion.
Plans, but it's not funded.
It's not funded.
That's what I
It's not
meant.
funded,
Yeah.
Although we've had folks on our teams from CDOT, and they're,
No, I've been there, yeah.
okay, well, they knew that discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Cautiously optimistic that the money will be found for that.
Isn't it correct, Miles, town trustee, great, isn't it correct that the overall cost of finishing that gap, is it about $200 million to go from 402 to 66? Is that correct, or am I close, or am I just making that up?
I think it's in that range.
In that range.
Yeah,
And then, of course, this money set aside over the next 5 years
right.
would be part of whatever local matches we need to provide to try to make that happen.
And what are you gonna do with that chunk of money after the 5 years for the next 15? Where is that allocated to? Is that allocated to another
So what?
CDOT project or?
No, how that's gonna work is, so the first 2 million every year for the first 5 years are gonna come right off the top. So that'll go in one bucket and be set aside in a fund. And then the remaining after the 2 million will be split, the 35 and the 55. Just for 55 for transportation, 35 for facilities. Then once that 2 million goes away, then the entire amount will be split, the 35, 55.
Oh.
Unless the policy committee says, gosh, we have a greater need right now for transportation than transit, so they could move 65% the other way. Thank you, Shane. And, or vice versa, if there was a big transit project in the region, then 5% of that money could be moved into that pot.
But is it correct, just so I understand, thank you, Mayor, that once the 10 million is set aside as a potential local match, then that 10 million would go back into the pot for local, regional transportation needs, whether they're road capacity expansion and/or transit?
Well, that 10 million, at least as I understood it, yes, would go back in for regional transportation. Yeah.
The remaining money
Yeah.
collected, right, is what
Right.
you're asking about?
The only-
That's
Right, for
correct.
the additional 15 years, right?
But it wouldn't necessarily go for a quote CDOT project.
Right, could be,
go for-
it sounds like it could be
It could be
anything
any
that's on the
project, yeah.
priority
Any
list, I
that's on
guess.
the list or a new project that comes in.
Right, okay.
And so is your final ballot language, do you think is gonna keep the flexibility with that 5% plus or minus for transit?
Yes. Because it's plus or minus for transit and plus or minus for the transportation side. And the reason that we thought of that is because of the county's experience with the first open space question. And that open space question was very specific in what percentages had to be divided. That got to be a bit problematic towards the end because there wasn't quite enough money for acquisition or there wasn't quite enough for this. And so the next ballot measure gave more flexibility. It was a greater percent than this. But we feel comfortable that having that little bit of flexibility, if a great project comes up, the policy board could make a recommendation, and we may be able to leverage the monies better than without having that. Any more on the split?
Right. And just to clarify, because I think you said that once the 10 million is met, so at the end of 5 years, now all of the tax revenue is falling through to your allocation. And I thought you said it all would go to local roads, but would it not still go 65-35?
It would depend on how they have the money at the time split between the transit portion and the transportation portion. But at least 55% of that would go into the transportation.
Right. But
It wouldn't go back to facilities.
Yeah, I think she was saying it's responsibility not being, going to CDOT, that was the mayor's question,
Correct.
I understand.
so I think it just,
But there are other projects on the list that are CDOT-related projects as well.
Like 34.
But I think-
34 is a huge, I mean, there's a whole study completed with projects there, but no
Mulberry
money,
corridor.
but no funding sources.
And I'm sure you've seen from the little PowerPoint presentation, the data point that suggests that there are 6 major corridors, roadways, at 34 being one of them, that unless we do something by 2045, we're going to be spending a lot of time in our cars.
The number was like 672 more hours.
A percentage increase, yeah.
Yeah.
so I believe, question.
Yeah, just, I guess maybe I'll ask the question the other way. After the end of 5 years, is facilities still getting 35%?
Facilities is getting 35% of the half penny period.
All the way?
Through
All
the
the way
duration.
through the
of it.
duration.
That was my question.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, but after the 2 million off the top, then it gets 35% of whatever's left
Correct.
for the first 5 years.
Yeah.
Yes. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just have a comment. I want to thank you, the county, for listening about transit, because those early meetings that I was at, it was all about the transportation. I think if we're looking 20 years out, there's no solution that doesn't include transit in Lamar County.
Thank you. I think some of the early hesitation was because of previous ballot discussions related, and that the folks who were leading the effort at that time didn't think that this would be successful if transit was included. And what we heard from all the stakeholders was the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And even the polling information indicated that having a portion go to transit would not hurt the ballot question.
I appreciate the challenge too, because as citizens, we drive on the roads, so we see that every day. We don't, most of us don't use the facilities that you're talking about.
Right.
At least I hope I don't go there.
Well, I must speak up. I must say,
So it's kind of a, you know, you have to take care of facilities,
Right.
but that's not something the public sees right away, so that's part of the
Yeah,
challenge.
it speaks to the question earlier about, you know, what would draw the other along, right? And-
Yeah.
And it's clearly, I mean, you know, the road issue is front and center with most people.
well, and again, truth be told, there's been, you know, some pushback that we've gotten on the facility side of things as well. These are county facilities. But if you really think about it, I mean, we're serving everyone in the county.
Right.
And we need to do as good a job as possible to make sure people don't have to travel to Fort Collins, for example, you know, to get, whether it's veteran services or something else.
Okay.
At what point do you think people start to squeal about, say, the amount of sales tax they're paying? I mean, I just did some quick calculations here. I think my figures are right, but I think right now in Windsor, on the Well County side, we're at 6.85, including state tax. And then if we tack your 0.8 that you're already charging and 0.5, we've got 8.15 for businesses in Larimer. And I don't know how that, I mean, that may be higher in Fort Collins and Loveland now. Do you have any idea what they're getting? I mean, we're getting into the mountain markup area now.
And I think both those communities are north of 9%, or 9, on sales tax.
Is Fort
With
Collins?
Centerra, I think it's 9.45 or something like that.
And Loveland's looking at their own transportation tax, so they might.
Yeah, they've agreed, they've split a little bit of their ballot.
But your point is well taken, at what point do
Right.
folks.
Like in the traffic there, so to speak.
And I think anytime we're asking the taxpayer to vote for money, it's never gonna be easy. So,
Well,
Yeah, the other piece we haven't talked about is the difficulty with construction escalation right now, right? In our master plan, we allowed for 6% escalation, which is more than double. You know, ENR has it at 2.7 annually, you know, escalated. And so we allowed for that for the first 5 years, anticipating that growth streak would continue, and it has, and it does. But makes it very difficult to fund these things. You know, 30 million becomes 50 in a big hurry, and so we would love to see, you know, a slowdown in that. Of course, that means, you know, a bigger, broader slowdown, which wouldn't help anybody either. But it makes, I'm sure anybody in here that, you know, gets involved with project planning, you know, on flat work, but certainly on capital construction for vertical projects, very, very tough to keep up right now. So.
And I guess I'd like to just add on to Dr. Jones's point. I think that's my only concern, just looking at the town, is that, you know, because we have about a third in Larimer and 2/3 in Will County, my concern is if the town decided in 4 years, hey, look, let's go for an open space tax, or let's, you know, look at our own transportation tax. We already have a third of our residents that are already in a pretty high taxing place, and so that is just kind of, I know it's just Windsor centric, but really that is kind of how I look at this, is if it does go, then we're gonna have our Larimer County businesses really at a pretty high.
What's the
tax.
saturation point?
That's right.
Yeah, it's tough, it's a tough issue.
We don't have the slide here tonight, Shane, but we can send it to you, because we do have all the different counties in the Front Range communities and what their sales tax is.
that'd be great.
If this does pass, if I remember right, we are not at the top of the pack. We're still somewhere in the low of the bottom for counties. And how the municipalities stack out, we used some information from Fort Collins when they went out to do their base increase, and even their sales tax when they were showing the rest of the Front Range cities was still kind of in the middle of the pack.
And can you remind us how the 0.8 right now is broken out? What you currently collect?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I can do some of that. And I also wanted to make a point on what you said, that in terms of the 0.88%, you know, the current county sales tax, all of that is for dedicated purposes. And for example, with the open space, that's part of it. I forget if that's 0.25%, but there's also the share back provision, right? So the county isn't getting all of that money. Some of that, there are formulas, and the same thing with the transportation. You know, municipalities, jurisdictions get some of that money to help with their open space needs. So that's important for people to acknowledge. But I can tell you that 0.25% is the Behavioral Health Initiative that was passed. I'm not sure if I want to say this, but last year, and I forget, maybe Ken or Lori, what is dedicated to the open space, and then
I
of
believe
course.
that's also .25.
Pardon?
0.25.
I believe that's .25.
And then
as
there's
well.
another portion, help me with the numbers, Shane.
So it'd be .3 left.
Well, then there's a portion that goes for the operation and maintenance of the ranch. I don't know
Yeah,
what's
so
that,
the ramp, the jail is 0.15.
and that's, is that .15?
I think there's both.
And then it's point,
Yeah, that gets you to .8, 2.15s and 2.
Oh, the ranch is
ranch is
0.15?
0.15.
Is the
Yeah.
ranch .15?
Yeah.
So,
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mhm.
and this jumps it to 1.3, right?
Good question.
This is
Very
like,
good
you know,
question.
sort of to the end of last year, it was that court case that involved online sales and sales tax allocations and sort of the, I mean, the message coming from the state was that we've got too many crazy, wild, disparate, you know, if somebody said, well, how much tax do I pay? It's like, well, what's your street address? Because you might be this, you might, and I think there was an effort to try to say, let's sort of levelize something so online sales could be manageable. Any, are you hearing anything more about that?
So you're talking about the Wayfair case?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I think the only state effort I've seen is to simplify the definitions. So to not hit the tax rates, not to worry about the tax rates, but really make sure if we say, you know, I don't know, car wash or whatever we define,
Sure,
that
okay.
it's the
Consistent.
same everywhere.
Okay, same
So-
product and service.
That's right.
Bucketed.
So that's been really, I think, the push from the state is just the definition side.
Okay.
I don't think there has been much of an effort on Wayfair. I think that the CML is taking the position, as long as places are kind of self-collecting and self-reporting, maybe we don't need to get any legislation or move on that. Certainly municipalities don't want to introduce anything until the Department of Revenue figures out what it's going to do, and it has not yet. And then the other day, when we were lucky enough to meet with Senator Gardner and Congressman Buck, we brought that up as well, that, you know, from a federal standpoint, it'd be great if they still took up that Marketplace Fairness Act and tried to address on a nationwide basis that the collection, because it really isn't fair to, you know, say like Dan Stouts downtown, there's things he sells you can get on Amazon. It's not fair if somebody can shop him and save themselves a 5% tax rate because they're not collecting right. So it really is kind of a small business equity thing. And obviously from the local government standpoint, a lot better if they're remitting.
It also brings up that the proposed county sales tax does exempt, as has always been the case for the county, purchase groceries and medicine, medications. So that would not be subject to the 0.5% county sales tax.
As far as jurisdictions go, if one of our officers arrests somebody up in Highland Meadows on the Lerner side, do they automatically go to Lerner County facilities?
Yes.
They don't bring them to Weld?
I believe that's protocol. If they're on the Lerner side, they go through the Lerner system and well.
And they would go to the district court system as well, downtown, as opposed to a different court system. Okay. Some of the more interesting discussion that's occurred the last couple of months is how to govern the money, especially when the idea of the transit came up. And so this is where we're at today. Very similar policy council to what we'd have for behavioral health or for the waste shed project, which is any agency who's participating gets a vote, and that person serves either an appointed or an elected official. We heard, especially from the smaller communities, that now that we're doing so much regional work, there may not be enough elected officials to go around to participate in what they need to do for their own community and the region. And could we have folks who may not be elected officials appointed? So we wanted to make sure that that was included in here. Some of the key staff members for some of the smaller communities are on every one of these groups, and so we're sensitive to that to be more creative in what the bylaws might say. There's a weighted vote component for the policy group on the transportation side, very similar to what the MPO would have, and that any member could call for that weighted vote, and what would happen is that that would automatically delay the vote by at least a month, 30 days. The MPO reports that that's only occurred one time that anyone can remember, and that it was resolved during that delay period of time. The other thing.
So who gets more than one? Fort Collins and Loveland? Is that how it's
Laramie
specified?
County.
Well, if it goes to the weighted vote, then it's what's showing up there, Shane.
Oh, 5
So
for
the-
Fort, 3
yeah,
for Loveland and Laramie.
Based on population distribution, 5 for Fort Collins, 3 each for Loveland and Larimer County, and 1 each for all the other municipalities. And we've done kind of the math, right? So you have to have some partners before you could take action on something like this.
How many municipalities are there in the one?
There's 8 total. Mhm.
Total but 6 besides the.
So there'd be 9 members, and the 8 municipalities and the county would be the 9.
And isn't
Yeah,
it
but there's 6 of the one votes.
Yes, thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks.
And then what we are looking to begin with, and this was not unanimous even in the technical advisory group discussion, because many of those folks have had experience working with the MPO. And the MPO had a very similar model to what we're proposing, that there would be a technical committee for the transportation projects and a technical committee for the transit projects. After a while, the MPO merged those back together. And again, they found it was easier to have that joint discussion before the board. I think that we would all agree with that if the transit side was as caught up as the regional transportation side is in this case. But what we have is about 18 months, almost 2 years of work on the road project formulas and how that money would be distributed and the rankings. And we have about 2 months of discussion without any kind of ranking or a shared understanding of what projects would look like on the transit side. And we would really like to get the transit operators and agencies to the table to have that discussion rather than have the folks that have been working on the regional transportation side. So that's the thinking, is that we would start with this dual model, and then as the boards matured, if you will, then there's nothing to prevent the policy group from saying we want to merge those two again and get away from 2 different committees.
But each community would have a seat on the technical advisory committee for transit as well?
Yes,
Okay.
Even without a transit,
even without a transit. You just have more votes, if you will, and this is still underway. If you were an agency that were contributing to transit already.
and for the policy council, I can't imagine there's not it won't be unanimous votes given the list of projects that we've all kind of been looking at for a couple of years, because the vote will strictly be on the order, right, after.
Well, there's some nuances that have happened in the discussion. So when the project list was first developed, it was in the minds of some who were developing it, that gosh, if a project fell off the list, maybe some other agency did that project on their own, then the list just moved up automatically. And that's all the list was gonna do, is move up. And there were no new projects coming in unless at the end of the tax period, there was money left over and then we could weight them with the same formula. We heard very loudly from all the agencies that, gosh, the project that's on my list might get funded by developers. And if that project got funded by developers, I might want to put a different project in. Or the project I submitted as number 1 18 months ago looks like it's going to be funded a different way. Or Loveland's case, we're going to the ballot for 34. If 34 passes, we won't need it as our top tier project. And so we've introduced more flexibility within some boundaries for those.
So you're just talking the top tier, the first 10.
I'm talking both tiers.
So if I'm 18th on the list is a Windsor project,
Yep.
we could replace that.
Well,
You-
yeah, so let me give you guys an example, because I know where she's taking it. So if we look at County Road 5, and so it's not done yet, but we are working with the developer, with the Ptarmigan project to maybe widen that. I think the entire project goes from Timnath to like Crossroads, right? And so we're doing that work right now. If this tax had been adopted, we'd basically go to the committee and say, hey, look, we've got a quarter-mile stretch, half-mile stretch, it's gonna cost us this much. If the committee said, yeah, we think that that's right, I think we get approval, and we basically don't get the money until it's funded, but we would have that money coming back to us at some point,
Right.
right?
There's a couple of different ways that we've talked about doing that, and the way Shane has described the first one, we're calling it a reimbursement project, because the goal is to get as many of these projects built regionally as quick as possible. So we don't want to penalize another agency if they can go out and get grant funding, or they decide to bond the project, or they fund it in a different way. But now their project in Fort Collins is a great example. Most of theirs don't come for funding until 2030. But maybe they've finished 3 or 4 of them that were supposed to be funded in 2030. Then what the group has decided is that then you'll be reimbursed your actual cost of construction. The savings then will be opened up for new projects that could come before the group and discussed, because that way the money could stretch even further than what we had first imagined.
And then the other thing is if we said, well, never mind, we're not gonna widen 5 for whatever reason. The question is there another eligible project that could substitute in, but it wouldn't necessarily get to sit in that same place where County Road 5 sat. So the technical group would take a look at that, would do the calculations and say, yeah, it rates high enough to where it can go in the spot, or sorry, it's going to the bottom, or however that works out, right? That's kind of substitute project.
Yes. The tier 1 would be substituted projects within the tier 1 group of projects. So you're not gonna fall out of the tier 1 into the tier 2 if you replace a project, but you might get funded a year later, or you might get funded sooner, depending on how that ranked. Same with the tier 2 levels.
So if you had a tier 1 project and it was $5 million, and you said, never mind, we're not gonna do that project, we want to substitute. If you found a project that was $2.5 million, would you have another $2.5 million to apply? You would.
Yes.
So whatever number's in tier 1, you get
Yes.
at least that number.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the great thing about that is if you wanted to bond a project, right? You could bond your payment over time and get that all done. I say that's great, but the county doesn't have a bonding capacity, so, all right. I really think that we have talked about all these things in conversation. And we talked about the last slide as well, which is kind of our next steps. Commissioner Cavallis talked about when the commissioners can consider this as to whether it will go on the ballot or not.
But it is gonna go on this fall, on this November's ballot?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and we'll make that final decision on, at the meeting on Tuesday. Yes, it will be on this ballot. And of course, one of the questions that's come up is, when is the right time? When is the saturation point? And that's a hard one to calculate, because almost invariably, there are other issues that are, Loveland has an issue that I think they might be putting on the ballot. Poudre School District is considering a mill levy override. I just read in the paper, I don't know if you, and I don't know how this would influence our efforts, that there's going to be a statewide ballot measure to allow for the refund dollars from Tabor, for the state to keep that. It's a referendum CC, I believe, because it's something that was referred by the legislature in the last session. So, piece of cake, I suppose. No, actually.
Well, so have you thought about or what happens if this doesn't pass? Then, what's the backup plan? Because obviously you've got a list of projects and things that have a need. They just continue to be on a wait list, or what happens? We saw that our voters definitely bypassed 2 transportation issues on November. Evans did pass their transportation ballot measure. Evans didn't pass theirs in the last election cycle. So, that's not to say that you wouldn't, but do you have a backup plan or not? Then what happens to all of these ideas and?
Well,
They don't go away.
they don't go away, and I think a really important piece of it is everything that's on the list is from somebody's master plan, their own local master plan. And so it's not like Windsor's master plan is gonna go away, or Fort Collins, or Timnis, or Estes Park. Those projects are captured locally. The goal of this project was to bring it all together as a region to try to get those projects to happen sooner. and really to benefit those smaller communities that might take much longer, like Wellington, to raise $15 million for an intersection there within their own locality, because that's not,
So they go on a deferred
yes.
plan of
Yes.
when the time comes, when the funding or
Yep.
the money presents itself through your current measures of money mechanisms.
That's a very good question, and I think maybe we need to do more deliberation on that. But what I would add to the answer that Lori gave is that many of you will recall that the Behavioral Health Initiative was not successful the first time. I think it was 2016. And then we realized that it was important to communicate to folks that it wasn't just about benefiting Fort Collins, but creating some kind of a facility that was going to serve folks in Fort Collins. So I think part of it is we'd have to go back to the drawing board, because these needs they're not going to go away.
Right.
2 meetings ago, there was discussion of putting this off. I mean, it was brought up at our meeting that maybe this isn't fully ready and it should be delayed for 2 years. And but I think the consensus was that we get something out there.
Yeah, from a facility standpoint, you know, the projects aren't gonna dry up either. There's a need across the board, you know, to figure that out. We'd have to get, you know, look at a whole series of options in terms of, you know, reducing space, or, you know, there's all kinds of things that we would have to throw into the mix, you know, and, or, you know, address it again at a future point on the ballot.
And has this group engaged, and I would assume really looked at, and it's kind of early in the behavioral health, right, what they're planning to do, but they are in some planning stages. Only because I'm on that committee, but have you looked to see how, like, your projects, because a lot of what your projects identified had to do with, you know, criminal justice and alternative sentencing, and I think even in some of the behavioral health, that issue we have to deal with there, because that's some of the consequences, right? And so are you looking at how maybe what you are looking at needing and what they're looking at needing could be achieved together? Or have they been completely separate
No,
conversations?
absolutely. I mean, I think those of us who've been at this for a long time recognize that operating in silos is not the best way to, you know, to have public-private, you know, delivery of services. And so, absolutely, the behavioral health initiative, what the impacts of that would be on people who are incarcerated for, you know, mental health purposes. We'll have more inpatient care, we'll have detox. All of that, I think, will help law enforcement. So, indeed, there's a lot of communication, and I think there's a lot of ability to complement, you know, what needs to be done to address the. You know,
I just wondered if on your priority list you've recognized, but I know they're kind of in the early stages where they're headed, so that we're not duplicating efforts, so we're having those conjoint conversations.
May I give you an example where I think that collaboration is occurring? May I give you that example?
Sure.
So one of the recipients of the $845,000 that your folks recommended to us, the county commissioners approved, is I think it's a $25,000 grant to something called Healing Warriors Program, and they do a lot of complementary work with veterans. So there's an example where we're funding for the Behavioral Health Initiative, something that is very creative, a different approach to dealing with sleep disorder issues, PTSD issues, et cetera, and that aligns up well with how we want to improve our Veterans Service Officer what we offer to veterans through the VSO, which is a lot of help with getting their claims from the VA, which is not always an easy thing to do. And right now, they're kind of crammed on the 5th floor where our economic and workforce development folks are, and it's been identified that that space, that configuration is not helpful to creating a place where people can sit down and discuss issues that folks are working with. I offer that as an example.
Okay.
The other thing I would add to that is even the way the county manager has structured the county. The deputy county manager assumes responsibility for both of those functions.
Curious, I look at this slide on the policy council on the transportation side and the 2 TAC committees. Well, on the facility side, is there a similar regional oversight planning kind of group?
Well, the master plan itself included that effort, and so we had workshops, particularly on the criminal justice side, that included, you know, chiefs from different agencies and things like that. So that was all rolled up into it. So that master plan was, I think we had probably as many as 40 people involved on the criminal justice side at different meetings and so on. So the planning and pre-planning that happened during the master plan was, intended to be a more regional approach to that. We don't have a governance though on that. I think that's to the point of that question. We have the needs spelled out. In some cases, the Justice Center, again, that's the courthouse building, and the jail project, we did a deeper dive on the master plan effort, both in the programming as well as kind of data collection, to get more detail into that, because we were certain that those were gonna be a high priority, and we needed more detail to give a better, I guess just a better planning figure, for the costs that we were gonna have to address. But there's not a plan to have like a regional, advisory committee for these projects. The projects are, generally speaking, pretty straightforward, in terms of expanding and providing and, doing the things that need to happen, again, to meet the regional needs for those services.
It may just be part of a story, though. I think the mental health facility, I think they did develop a joint oversight group that really represented the region. And
the
it
service
made it look better.
On the service
when
side,
you're
for
telling
sure.
the story about justifying the tax and the allocation.
Right. We, we would address those projects, like we're doing behavioral health. We've got a team together that includes several folks from, the county, and then there's the services side of that you're describing, that's kind of the overseer of the whole program. But the facility itself, we've got, Summit Stone has been selected, so they're gonna be part of that, early design process, to help determine what the building and campus look like. And then our facility side, as well as an owner's rep, that's tied into that, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Was there any consideration to put the jail into this and then use the COP money for some of these other projects like veterans or something else?
I can respond to that. I think that historically, and that was some of the pushback when we had the discussions about the jail remodel expansion. But historically, when the county has gone to the voters to ask for increasing county sales tax to expand the jail, that's not been successful. So I think the short answer to your question is no. That wasn't a consideration as far as the jail aspect of this.
Sorry, I hadn't heard about COPS until he just mentioned it. Are there certificates of participation?
For the jail.
That's what's paying for the jail.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the $75 million piece that the commissioners, supported when they adopted the master plan in the early part of 18. That was always, per what John just said, that was always the plan, was to, basically address that without having to go back and expand. I mean, it obviously incurred debt, but it did not require, an extended, sales tax.
And the COPs are intended to be paid off, assuming we still have a resolution to authorize the issuance of the COPs, would be paid off ideally in a 15-year time frame, and based on projected revenue increases from appreciation of value, people's properties. That, yes, we can have a lively discussion about that. We can come back for a small work session. But
That's what we want to go
we've
back.
identified money in the budget that would be dedicated towards paying off that debt. And it's about $7 million a year.
Okay. So you said you'll decide next week if this is gonna be on the ballot, or when
That's
will?
correct, yes.
Okay.
When was the last time a sales tax was on the ballot? When was the last one passed?
The mental health.
Initiative.
Last year, that's where, again, it's interesting. It was last year, Paul.
Last May, or was it November?
Say that again?
Was it May or November?
No, it was a general regular election.
Yeah, it was November. But I thought that involved property taxes. I thought that was,
No,
it was,
0.25% increase in the county sales and use
And
tax.
then before that was the ranch, the year
Yeah,
before, 2 years.
The ranch was an extension. Right?
Extension.
Yeah, that was
That was
basically,
about-
that was no new money, it was just extending what was in
And
place.
open spaces.
And the county,
Yes.
yeah, the open space originally, I forget, that was years ago, and then there was an extension of that, and I think that even with the extension, I mean, that's something that people have demonstrated, overwhelming support for figuring out expansion and maintenance of open space and natural.
well, what are the feelings after all the property tax, appeals and everything else? What's the temperament right now with raising taxes?
I mean, they just hear raise taxes, it probably worries people, and I don't live in Laramie County. I pay a hell of a lot of commercial taxes, so they've gone up quite a bit every year. I've had my,
Have we done any of our polling that is gauging that? I mean, I would think that anecdotally, or based on what we're hearing, some of the pushback and the appeals and the number of hearings we had, Board of Equalization hearings, I would imagine that's an issue that we're gonna have to address, carefully and in a sensitive way.
Yeah.
Because I imagine the temperament is not a happy one.
understandably.
But a couple when they presented the polling at our meeting, it was very favorable, it seemed like, with, even with the combined transportation and facilities.
Yeah,
They looked at them combined, they looked at them
That's also
separate, so it pulled well, but maybe that was.
But was that before though?
I don't know, we got presented, it was.
Well, we had 2 transportation ballot measures that
No, this
went on
was-
the ballot
this was just
because
a couple months
polling
ago.
showed that
Yeah,
too as
yeah.
well, and yet they got,
We should find out.
I
That's 'cause they
mean,
were
you never know,
competing.
it's
On
gonna
the
be.
positive side, people are
time.
more likely
But-
to support a local,
Yes.
because
I
they
think-
think we can see.
Well, this has a whole
Right.
mixture of things, it's
Yeah.
not
Right.
slated towards one
Right.
thing, I mean, you've got 4 different, or at least 3
Right.
different, but 4 initially.
And a list of
different.
projects that people can see.
Right.
Wasn't the polling done in the spring? Do you know?
Yes.
So
Mostly in the second
therefore,
quarter.
if it's correct that the polling was done in the spring, people had already received their,
Yeah.
well, actually, they didn't receive their notice of valuations till May. Therefore, it would likely occur before that, so. And I don't know if there's any work right now to do an update of that survey, but that's a good point, again, Shade.
I was really at Mr. Rennemeyer's point. I'm just, the elected officials make me look good, Commissioner, if you know.
Okay, well, it looks like we will know in about a week or so, and then it'll be full speed ahead or back to the drawing board, right?
And you folks will, I'm sure, deliberate amongst yourselves to determine if there's any collective course of action that you may want to take, or just, keep us in your thoughts and prayers.
Or both.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Any final questions for these folks? Thank you for taking the time to give us the presentation and
Thank
the
you.
information,
Thank you.
so we
You're
know
welcome.
Excellent set
the
of
details
questions.
behind
Thank you
this.
all.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
It's easier than monthly.
And that's a good point, that maybe we should see a post-evaluation, post all this stuff in the assessments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
By the way, you have a very nice town hall. I'd like to visit it sometime. It's a very cool town hall.
Drive safe on the roads.
You know, when I came in at 5:30 or so, I expected, now I'm gonna really see what Highway 392 coming in, because I saw it the other day.
Which should be cleared out, so.
Well, but even coming in at 5:30, it wasn't bad at all. But I-
Well, we have done some improvements
Oh, seven,
lately,
so-
maybe that's helped.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay,
Thank you.
Terry, you wanna come up here? I guess you looks like you're are you presenting? Okay.
Do you need to drive anything on this?
You know, wouldn't want to have the same.
Huh? I get it second.
I haven't been to see it.
Thank you again, Commissioner. Okay, we're gonna get to our second item this evening, which is a Public Works capital request. And so we have Mr. Walker here to present that for it to us.
So, Chris Dempsey wrote an email to the town board stating what this is about. Chris is our fleet manager. We were gonna have in the 2020 budget a brand new vac truck. Williams Equipment had a demo, and we've seen several demos, and this was the one that we felt serves all of our needs and wants. They decided that they would sell that demo to the town of Windsor for about a $50,000 reduced cost. So with that, Severance had contacted us, and they want to buy our existing vac truck. And so we gave them a cost, I think originally of 90, but then they offered 85. So we're gonna get between 85 and 90,000 from Severance for that vac truck.
Is that fair market value?
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's better than market value.
Oh, okay.
Nope, you're on record, it's exactly a fair price.
It's exactly the fair price.
It's my top.
It's been well taken care of and well managed.
Driven on Sundays.
We're gonna fill up the window.
The mayor's already talked to Severance, they're good.
But Severance needs one, you know, as soon as they can get it, and they just can't afford 280,000 for a brand new one. So they really want ours.
485,000.
Yeah,
Neither can we, but we'll make it work somehow or another.
well, they would like to get it as quick as possible, and Williams Equipment, we've already signed a letter saying that depending on what the board wants to do, that we would go ahead and pursue purchasing that truck yet in 2019, towards the end of this year. And then we could sell ours to Severance at that same time.
And so, and I'm sorry to jump out with the commissioner, but I think the real conversation here is that if the board didn't want to do that now, we'd be requesting it with our equipment fund coming up here in just a couple months. I mean, it's already gone through the fleet committee.
Right.
So it's something that we've already accommodated for next year.
So you have money in the fund to pay for this
We do.
expenditure as we speak?
We sure do. So this is just, I think, a good way to save taxpayers, the town, $50,000 for the exact same piece of equipment. And then secondly, these things take like, once you order them, like 9 months, 10 months.
10 months to get it.
So we could put it in the fleet right away versus budgeting for it and once we order it, you'll get it here next September, October.
And the question I had with Williams Equipment was, when does our warranty start? It starts when we purchase it. So we get the same warranty as if we bought it brand new from the time we purchase it. So it's a win-win for us.
Is it by hours? Is it by hours, how old or how much it's been down?
It's by years.
So it should start when we get delivered.
We
The
said
hours on
September.
it, right, the hours on it right now, they take that into consideration.
Okay.
But then they give us the years or hours, whichever comes first, depending on whether it's the transmission, whether it's the, you know, what it may be, so.
And did I hear you right? Severance is prepared to take delivery of the old machine?
They have called us-
ASAP, and are they prepared to deliver a check for that 80 or whatever the agreed upon amount is? So then our total bottom line would be about 355, right? If you take the 485 minus 50 minus another 80?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that
That's
right?
right, yeah, so I don't know, I met with the manager earlier today, but we didn't talk about the specific truck, we're talking about some other things, but I think they would be prepared.
In the meantime, we could proceed and then wait for their check. We wouldn't
That's right.
deliver the equipment until we got the check from them.
That's right.
Right, and we would want to make sure that we get our truck before we sold them our.
Right.
How long have we had the truck we have right now? What's the shelf life or what's the?
We've had it 5 years, I think.
But it's a 2009.
2009, we bought it used.
No, we bought that new.
It says 2000.
Okay, so we've had it 10 years.
Well, is that the same as a sewer jet?
Yeah, except the vac truck also sucks the dirt and the mud and everything up, so if you have a water leak, you can, it'll suck all that up and you can get right down to the leak right away, rather than have to have a backhoe come in and dig it out. And this new truck is a lot bigger and a lot more productive than our old truck is. And it comes with like 6 different add-ons that we normally wouldn't have asked for, but it's already on it, so we're getting those as well. So it's a good deal for the town of Windsor.
Leather seats and
Leather seats, air conditioning.
XM radio. About
Heated seats.
the budget impact, obviously we have the money, that's great, we can save money. But there won't be a new project next year.
That's right, so we
Okay.
would take the list that the fleet committee's already looked at, and we'll just subtract this out of it.
So they'll have $485 less dollars next year.
Less requested next year,
Yeah,
yeah, so
requested.
it'll be basically a $50,000 net that we would have more for the next year.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I just didn't know.
Yeah, we
It's
won't
not gonna
backfill
backfill
that.
right?
No,
Okay.
there won't be a backfill.
Okay, good.
And
And
is
can
there-
I-
How long do these typically last? Is that about right? 10 years? Have we had? we've
Well,
had
let's
one
hope
be-
it's lasting longer, because Severance wants it, so maybe 15, 20 years.
Well, I mean.
We have all of our equipment on a plan that we put them on, and once, you know, the market value or something starts to decline on it, or there's something wrong with it that takes the value down, that's when we decide to get rid of it. And so this, we were approaching that anyway with this one, but since Severance wanted it, we
Because you
thought,
weren't getting rid of it because it doesn't work anymore, you're just,
No.
you just wanted a,
Basically what our software does is it tries to calculate the best time, the most advantageous time for us to trade something in, so kind of the max trade-in price value for us. So no, I would think Severance would get many years.
yes.
Probably $190,000 worth of value for what I'm selling.
they're not gonna use it near to the extent we used it,
Right.
so they'll get plenty of years of service out of it.
And in a nutshell, the fleet committee just decides what vehicles need to be replaced based on
Yeah, that's right.
mileage or hours or whatever.
So we'll go through, we'll take a look at the ones that meet Chris's list, and we'll prioritize those. We'll also take, we know we're gonna get new vehicles coming in with new employees. So there's not necessarily, there really isn't enough money to do everything we try to do to keep in the budget. So we'll prioritize and say, okay, let's not replace these 2 police cars this year, they're not as high mileage. And so the committee will just kind of discuss it and just kind of figure it out for town priorities, you know, where we are and what really kind of passes muster, and then that's the list we take to the board.
Okay. So what is it, does it sound like, or do you have one final question?
I was just wondering if you have any,
Price of the day.
Yeah.
if you have any comparables on that. Just want to make sure that the prices we've got on both sides of this deal are market.
Right, I would ask Terry that.
The new one,
I utilize Chris Dempsey a lot. Our fleet manager is extremely good, and so I know they've done a lot of research on this.
Okay.
But I haven't actually seen the comps myself.
And he's on the State Fleet Managers Association Committee. He's, you know, he's good at knowing what they're worth and what they're not worth. And if we can get 85,000 out of ours, we're doing well.
So it's
Well, and
new-
that's, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, it's newer, better, brighter. We save money, we save time, and we help out one of our regional partners. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer.
Well, but we've gone in the last handful of years to the software programs telling us what we really need to do and when, right? I mean, that's really the default. I mean, we have all of our roads, so we know what to do at what stages to get the, you know, a maximum amount of life out of each road in town. So they're all inventory, we keep track of it all. I would say that's the default answer, is if it says that this is the optimal time.
And I like that there's a factor in there of the optimal time to replace or sell something based on
Market value.
market value.
And
Right.
Severance has a tendency to buy a lot of our equipment because they know how well it's maintained, how good we take care of it. And so all the other, the trucks and stuff they bought from us, they've had really good use out of, so they know they're getting a good piece of equipment.
Okay. What's the consensus of the board? To move ahead? See,
Sure.
looks like your wish is granted.
Thank you very much. Sorry I ran a little bit late. I didn't know the traffic from Fort Collins was gonna be as bad as it was.
Oh, you should.
I thought you were putting in overtime. I thought you were just coming from public works.
The other thing was, I didn't know it was gonna take my mom an hour and a half to get groceries.
Well, you should have.
No, that's the way our meeting went earlier.
Okay, let's move on to our last item
I
then.
thought you were driving the street sweeper.
Is the MS4 permit process and fee discussion. Who's gonna lead that?
Yeah. You guys can both jump up at the table.
Oh,
We have 2 chairs.
Two chairs, that's all that's left.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of lead it and say, you know, I think the last time that we talked about MS4 and some of the enforcement side, well, not enforcement, but I guess at least ensuring that we're in compliance. We talked about working with Safe Built and seeing if there's some way to use our existing inspectors to do that, or some way to put a program together. So this is something that Safe Built hasn't done, at least here, and so it's taken a little while for us to figure out the programming. So really, staff is just gonna talk to you about that, about just kind of the program. We have a couple options, so we just wanted to let the board know that. And also, just so everybody knows, this is kind of a lead-in, because as we look at our storm drainage fund, it's the least healthy of all the funds we have for the town.
Right.
You know, and so as we look at these programs and for example, Public Works has requested to bring on an operator next year, and that person's primary job would be a second street sweeper. True, what we would probably do, if we're gonna follow the best practice, is to probably pay about 50% of their salary out of the storm drainage fund, because half the time they're street sweeping and they should be paid out of that fund. But the fund isn't really strong enough to do that. So we're gonna talk a little bit tonight about this program, but it's gonna also kind of be a lead-in, I think, for a future conversation.
Well, I have that marked down based on your
Weekly update.
update that went out, that I think we need to have a work session on storm drainage fees
Yes,
and the fund
absolutely.
this
Yes.
fall, and take a look at that.
Well, 100%, Mayor, we're on the exact same page.
Okay.
I thought this would be a good way to talk about, I think when we talk about the program and we talk about Safe Built, and their fee structure, it'll kind of show the board just kind of how, at least on private enterprise, they think to value these things. So it'll be a good conversation.
So as I detailed in that memorandum, we have to do, you know, the inspections, they are a part of the permit requirements. But it is just taking quite a bit of time to conduct all these inspections, right? I think I'm approaching, since May 6th, 100 inspections I have completed. They take an average of about an hour to do. So, and the construction program is just one part of the MS4 compliance piece. So there's quite a bit going on. So Scott originally, you know, thought of maybe Safe Built could help us. And so we have been talking with them for quite a while. Did you all see the attachment that came with the memorandum, the fees that they wanted to charge?
Yes.
So, yeah, they are calculating, you know, just for a drive-by inspection with, you know, getting out there, looking at things, and completing a report and sending it out is $40 for 8 to 10 inspections. So what they will charge in addition on the building permits for a single lot.
I was confused by that. $40 per lot, one-time charge, but they're gonna come out 8 times.
Right.
So that's where we get the 200 per lot.
The 200 would be the Cadillac version.
Okay.
That would be where they would
So
be.
they're gonna come out 8 times for $40? No, or 8 times?
Just a drive-by.
Just a drive-by, okay.
So say you've
Okay, I was
got
confused.
you know, a subdivision and they've got 40 lots out there and they're usually, you know, clumped together, several
Yeah.
addresses in a row. They're just gonna drive by.
It's $40 per lot.
Mhm.
Okay.
But it's a one-time charge for that lot.
Correct.
They'll do it 8 to 10 times.
Correct. And the way I believe that would work is that they would, we would collect that, and then Safe Built would charge the town for payment of that. Just
They
like,
collect from the home builder.
and they would be charged to the home builder.
So yeah, they would pay the fee, and we would collect it and track it through their community court software. But it would be the same methodology where they would bill us for the services, and then we write them a check each month.
So you're doing more than a drive-by, obviously, for each one that takes an hour.
Well, that's you know, cradle, I mean, that's start to finish
Yeah.
on the inspection, which is, you know, getting out there, getting your bearings, looking at things, taking photographs, documenting them, and getting the reports prepared and then sent out and then filed.
And the drive-by is satisfactory under the law, or would be, still be
Yeah,
compliant?
it's what's called in the permanent indicator inspection. And we can do those every 2 weeks in lieu of a more involved inspection, which is a routine inspection. And that's, you know, getting down in the weeds and really kicking the tires.
They're gonna drive by, look for water running
Major
down,
problems.
make sure the barriers are there in front of each of the
Correct.
stormwater
Yeah.
openings.
I mean, you know, the major control measures are functioning as designed, and, you know, that's what you do in an indicator, but in a routine, you'll get behind the scenes a little bit more.
So talk about the $200 inspection.
$200 inspection would be where that would, they'd just take it from start to finish. They would review the building permits, the plot plans, and make sure that they are falling within our guidelines of compliance. Make sure they have, we require a sample plot plan to be submitted with the single lot building permit application for stormwater. And on that plot plan, it's going to have, you know, what control measures are you using, how are you controlling trash? You know, what are you doing out there to manage your stormwater? What's your sweeping schedule? You know, those kind of things.
Is that the routine?
So.
Is that what you've called routine here?
This would be what we would ask Safe Built to do for a $200 per lot charge.
Right, but he's
They-
asking
they
if that's
would-
what you call a routine inspection, if that's the same thing, is what they'd be doing.
I'm looking at your fee chart,
Oh,
and if I add up the
right.
60, 40, 40, 20, I get the 160. I add the $40 processing fee, I get to 200.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to figure out, it looks like the 200 includes then all of the inspections above at the upper level, plus the processing fee.
It would
But
be-
that's not what I'm hearing you say.
Oh, well, I'm
Because
sorry.
They're different words.
I was trying to explain the whole process of everything that they would take over. So they would be doing the review. To simplify, they'd be doing the review. They would be issuing the permit. They would be doing the inspections, and they would also be enforcing for us. They do just basically for that $200 cost, we wouldn't be getting any revenue from it, and they would be doing all of the work.
Wouldn't that be better than a $40 drive-by? To know, are we getting a much more thorough inspection for $200 than we are
Well,
for 40?
if you ask me, I think so. I think you've got continuity there, rather than me stepping in every 45 days to do a routine, but not knowing what has been, you know, obviously I'll have access to the reports through community court and everything, but there's something about establishing your relationship with the builder, with the sub.
So who would be doing that? They would take the place of doing that, and then you'll have to remind me, like, if we have Safe Built review, permit, inspect, and enforce,
Mhm.
what else is your position doing? I mean, what else do you have to do besides that?
Okay, what I would do then for single lot, this is just a single lot portion of inspections, I would still be doing the grading, erosion, and sediment control for the bigger projects. So I currently have about 20 of those that I'm inspecting right now. And they can range anywhere from 1 acre to 160 acres. So they can take quite a bit of time. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. To answer Tom's question, that I think that the continuity is really important here. I think it's more efficient for them to do everything. And that what my role in this would be tracking for the annual report to the state every year. I would have, I would get the reports that they would generate on a monthly basis and an annual basis. And then that would be what I could send into the state. For the construction program, the state wants to see the numbers of inspections you've done. And that's the key thing that they want to see out of the construction program. So they want to see how many compliance inspections, how many indicator inspections, how many routine inspections. And it's a record-keeping nightmare, but Safe Built has a very good program in place to manage it. That's what they do.
Does Safe Built do this in other communities for
No.
this specific MS4?
This would be their first foray into this activity. So they did hire a new inspector, and they're having him trained to do these inspections. But Windsor would be their first test with this, and then I think they plan to expand it to other communities, but
Do we currently charge for these inspections
No, we don't.
we have,
for pass through to these developers?
yeah, at this point, we haven't charged anything, and that's kind of why we wanted to have this discussion tonight, so.
Because, so we do have options, so we don't have to go with the 200
Right.
range. We could do, I mean, there's variations depending,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure that we'd need to do, I mean, I don't know.
That's what I wanted to
Depends.
ask. You've done 100, did you say 160 inspections?
About 100 to date.
About 100. Any trends in what you're finding?
Oh, yeah. And there's always something. I've never come across a perfect site yet.
The reason I'm asking, I'm thinking about what Christie's asking, do we need just the 40 one time, or if there's issues that are coming up, maybe we need to go to the 200? That's what I'm trying to evaluate.
Well, typically on an indicator inspection, I will see something, which will generate then a compliance inspection. The operator,
And you do that then too, right?
well, if depending on what, what we pick from this menu for me to do, then I would do.
Currently you do.
But currently, that is what I do right now.
These
But we could have
functions don't
safe-
go away.
But we could have
Some-
Safe Build do it too. I mean, we could have them do the $40 whatever, and then if
come
it,
back, right?
then it could
Yeah.
make them do a compliant, then, but they could be the one that goes out to do.
And does the compliant inspection. Go ahead with what you're finding, Bill. You say you're finding something just about every.
Just about every single time. Now, the permit, bless them, does allow for the operator to send a report in with photos of the findings. And that can be an email. And a lot of folks are liking that, and they do, because it keeps the inspector out of their business for one more week. So, that's, but that doesn't always happen. There's no guarantee that they're going to abide by that, and I do it, like just today, I went out and I had to do a compliance inspection. They had fixed everything, but they didn't send me an email with photos.
So if we do the 200, I assume there's still oversight by you. I mean, you have to make sure they don't miss a house, or is that a different function?
Well, if, they're pretty accurate with their record keeping, and it's a good system.
Regina, I'd like you to hit on more your specific workflows, because definitely if Safe Build does a 40, that's gonna mean more work coming out of your office and more things you're gonna be responsible for versus the 200. So if you could just try to elaborate a little bit more for the board about that, because again, I think this is gonna get into our next budget discussion of, is the needs grow in the department? Can we, offshore some of that to Safe Build and not have to?
This was a concern, because I heard, looking at this program, first time I heard about it, Water and Sewer Board, and talked about inspections, and there's one person, and this is just one, construction is just one component of there's other things we need to be inspecting in town, and there's no way to do that, so that's a big question for me, is what's our next steps along with this?
Well, if construction is growing, and since we are now in MS4, anything that qualifies to be permitted is going to continue to be wrapped in. And some projects, as you know, last a long, long, long time. They don't fall off like you would want them to off the schedule, so it just continues to accumulate and build. So, for instance, tomorrow I have 7 single lot inspections that I call them. And they are indicators, but I'm gonna be covering probably, 150, 180 acres of driving around to look at things. And that's the start of it. Then there's the reports to issue, which are gonna take me a half hour apiece. I will do nothing but construction tomorrow. And then if there is something wrong at any one of these sites, then that generates another look at the site next week. And then, if they still are not compliant, then we go into a non-compliant situation. And that could potentially, it hasn't yet, but it could potentially start to involve Ian with some litigation if they're not compliant. So it gets to be.
I don't understand why we wouldn't want to outsource the whole thing.
Absolutely. Well,
The only.
One, it shifts the burden of proof and shifts the liability to Safe Bill.
right.
Two, should the economy change,
Exactly.
cool off,
That's what I'm thinking.
it
Right.
helps alleviate, yeah, I think it.
We can gear up or gear down,
Workflows
depending on where, right.
can be modified.
Right,
with that.
plus, there's other components within MS4 that need inspection, so
Mhm.
you're gonna have other responsibilities besides just the construction.
Municipal
program.
facilities.
Yeah.
There's quite a few things that I'm just sort of putting on the back burner, education outreach.
I still want to push a little bit more on the type of things you're finding, and where I'm heading with
Okay.
this is the 40 versus 200,
Mhm.
or someplace in the middle. The bottom line is we want clean water, we want safe water. So what's the level of severity of the things you're finding? Is there really bad stuff going in my water?
Well, you've got 3 or 4 typical control measures used at construction sites. You've got silt fence, you've got inlet protection, you've got concrete washouts, and you've got those foam wattles
All
or
which is
some
going
kind
into our treatment plant.
Hopefully not.
Well, right, yeah, that's.
Well, and a lot of it goes into the non-potable sources.
Which goes into my irrigation system. That's my thought.
Stormwater flows
No, that's-
straight to
straight to-
cash pollutant.
Mhm.
Okay, okay.
Some.
But someplace it's gonna be cleaned.
Well, we have a lot of detention facilities and different
Right,
things, but
okay.
it never does get actually mechanically, physically, chemically cleaned like the water that we get out of our tap in our homes.
What's the worst case scenario if we just did the 40?
Well, it would help a little bit. But-
And then the next one is the compliance, right? That's what you were suggesting, that.
Well, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah.
we have to do one or the other, we can't have a flexible schedule.
That's what I'm wondering, if you can have
Depending
a.
on, I mean,
When we met with Safe Built, I understood, we were basically presenting.
or they wanna know one or the, they wanna know
That's right.
one, like
If
we're
they're
looking at a
hiring
menu, they wanna know what we
Oh, I
want
see where
instead
they're
of
coming from.
kinda depending on
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
when they're going out, what it looks
Right,
like.
and Scott, I
Okay,
mean,
gotcha.
what I caught is basically, we were looking at 2 options, the $40 option or the 200.
Right, it wasn't anything in between.
Right.
No,
And so again, Janine, I would like you to kind of just exemplify a little bit more, if we just do the $40 one, what workflows do you keep? What things, kind
Okay.
of, by going to 200, what workflows are you able to kind of offshore to Safe Built versus if we don't do that?
Okay, starting from the beginning, it's the permitting process with the builder. Quite a bit of time and conversation goes into that now, since this is new. Then there would be the, looking at the plot plans to make sure that they're in compliance. A lot of review, a lot of legwork to get the permit in place. And then there would be the inspections would start. That begins with an initial inspection, which is a very thorough routine type inspection. And then the every 2-week indicators. Now, if I find something wrong on any of those, then there's that midweek is always taken with an inspection.
So how many hours or days a week is construction taking up for you right now?
2
2
days a week.
Okay.
Solid. And it's not gonna stop there at this rate,
Right.
because we, I don't know how many
Well, you
projects
started,
we had.
if there were projects that were started before a certain date,
May 6th, when we had the ordinance signed, that's when the inspections and the permitting started.
so there were some projects that are out there that started prior
Right.
and aren't taking Janine's time.
Right.
But as we get further from that date, everything will then be on your plate.
I think there's, 5 or 6 more that are, I have some that have paid their permit fees and everything, I'm just waiting for them to call me for their initial inspection. So I anticipate probably by the end of the year, I'll have 30 or 40 projects, GESCP only, not to mention single family, single lot stuff. It's a,
Please.
David has a
Yeah.
question.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know why. I can't seem to. So, I'm sorry, because I'm, in front of me, I'm looking at what I think is. My 3 minutes. I think I'm looking at the price sheet that Safe Built submitted. So they seem to be using terminology a little bit different from what you're using, at least when they were quoting services. If I look at their price list and it says MS4 single lot, what I think I'm hearing you say is prior to any inspection, you're looking at plot plans, you're meeting with the developer, you're kind of going over the overall project. That's a piece of work that needs to get done by somebody.
Right.
Then the routine that they've quoted, every 45 days to 60, again, that's work that someone has to do.
Correct.
And you would do it now. The indicator is the yellow one, which you're saying is, that has to be done as well every 14 days, now they would do that.
Right.
Compliance, complaint, it's only after a failed inspection, so that's not done in all cases, it's only if they fail something.
Right.
Or is that, or do they fail in all cases?
In most cases, they do, yeah. most of
And
the
I would
time.
say that's because this is very new.
And I think.
All
once
these
we-
regulations and
Exactly.
stuff are very new. Once, I think, you know, after, and we have a lot of the same developers and folks, and so once they kind of gone through the process and have learned what they need to do, I would hope that by, you know, the next go round, we would find less of that.
There's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah, yeah.
These aren't good builders, they build in other communities. don't they?
Right, but there's simple things like one builder, I had pushed him all the way to non-compliance situation because he wasn't getting anything back to me. And I was going out on the site and things weren't improved. But it turns out that he was texting me the pictures and texting them, trying to text them to my work phone. So I wasn't getting anything. So, you know, it is a learning curve. I mean, you just have to send me emails, not texts, and things like that have to be picked up. But you're right. I mean, I think as we get into more of a routine with the builders, they'll understand that, you know, this is the
What's
inspection
expected,
day.
yeah.
And, you know, boy, you better have it cleaned up. And a lot of them are doing that. I'm very.
Because these aren't our rules, these are mandated, you know,
So what,
Federal.
what's we,
Right now, you're doing all of that, then?
Yes, sir.
And you're saying 2 days a week is all of that, or?
I would definitely put 2 days a week into this. I'm behind on some other.
I think some of her
programs.
challenge right now too is after the MS4 was adopted by us, there was significant pushback by many developers as to, even though they know that they've accepted that it's law, they don't agree with why it needs to be done, you know, I mean, so there's some of that.
We've always done it this
lackadaisical-
way, why do we
Right,
have to change?
there's some of that lackadaisical behavior that, yeah.
One thing that I like to consider is the relationship we have with Safe Built, the relationship they have with the developers and builders in the area, the efficient system that they have on top of the work, and like Paul, you said, I like that flexibility as the market changes as well.
Yeah.
It seems like a win-win.
This would be a separate agreement because it is kind of a whole different animal.
Right.
You know, building inspections, they get a called in inspection by the builder and they go out sporadically when they get those called inspections. This one where it's a
It's regulated.
regular, you've got to go out this many times or this every so often. We'll probably set up a whole different agreement for the MS4 program, but it would be a similar concept.
But I also think that the building community and the development community has a good relationship with Safe Built at this point, so I would think that there's a level of respect between.
Sure.
Well, but my hesitation has nothing to do with Safe Built or who they are or their reputation. We know they do a good job. My concern is we already know that we've got the storm drainage fund issue, that we don't have, we're behind in the funds. Now this is additional money that we have to pay out.
Don't we build the developer?
And no, we're not building the developer.
No, we haven't yet because we haven't had this
So,
conversation.
but then again, that's the other question. We keep talking about the affordability of housing, but now we've got another charge that we wanna probably tack on because we gotta figure out how we're gonna pay for it. But how do we pay for it?
Well, but
I
this
mean,
wasn't a position we had a year ago.
I know, but we
But I'm just
took that
saying, because of
when we
state
hired-
legislation, we've had to.
I know, we hired
it's-
that, this is in addition to though, Paul.
Right.
We've come to this position and we have this position because we're mandated and we have to do this. This is on top of that, an additional
Yeah,
request.
another
It's not like
$200
it's 5 or
on
10,000, it's at 100 requests at, you know, $200, it's,
Well, if we
We
went
can
with,
hire our own
the-
inspector.
that's 20 grand.
if we went.
Or
with the-
more, if, I mean, I don't think we'd stop at 100.
See if I understand.
I don't,
We
doesn't
would-
sound like, we were only halfway through, right, that you've done 100?
Yeah.
Since when? That's not
Well,
even
that's-
6
that's-
months of the
I'm
year, is it?
mixing.
Because you didn't do them in the winter.
We got over 600 building permits, right? I mean, so, but let me, maybe I misunderstood. If we went with the 200, I said if, that would be passed on to the home builder, so the price of the home goes up $200.
Yep, that's
It's not gonna cost the town anything,
correct.
but the price of the home goes up $200.
Yeah.
And you're
Except my-
assuring them, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I just want to make sure I understood.
Well, they're not
that.
just gonna charge it $200.
You think?
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's,
Administrative
the costs for all of the requirements now are costing them to have to comply. There's a cost probably for that. I mean, you know, additional things.
They have to pay for their own permit.
They have to pay, yeah, so.
I would think, Scott's the one that could answer this, I would think a $200 fee is probably the cheapest fee they have in the house. I don't know that $200 is gonna be something that's gonna get,
No, I'm just saying though, you add it up on top of.
I'm not trying to act disrespectful
Adding
to the
up
building community or the
and adding
develop,
up,
you know.
I'm just saying, how are we gonna pay for
Well,
it?
think of the end user. You're giving some kind of a warranty, I would guess, to the end user that it's properly inspected, they're not gonna have a drainage problem. We just got a complaint from somebody in Village East. Water's pooling on
Yeah.
their lot for some reason or other. You know, I don't know what happened there in the original plans, the drainage inspections or whatever. But I guess, did you tell them it's an HOA issue now?
What-
It is, yeah. That's one of mine.
That is HOA, and engineering has talked to him and is coordinating and tying to our storm water or our wastewater system, so.
Right.
But that is different, this is really gonna just be the compliance, so they're not gonna be out looking at site grading, they're gonna make sure that the controls on site are appropriate, so they have the right models, they have the right.
During
They're temporary,
Yeah.
temporary.
It's not giving the homeowner any additional assurance about their home
It's
at all.
not, this is ensuring that the.
It's ensuring that we are federally following and not polluting the stormwater drain.
That's right.
That's all it's doing.
That's right.
And I'm not saying that that's not important.
Right.
But it's not an assurance to the homeowner
That's what
that's
it's for,
working
but
there.
I think Doug Jones made, when I was trying to say this earlier, the end user, the water some places being used somewhere, either on my vegetables or something. So it's a good thing. Question, how are other communities doing this? Do they have a
Nobody-
whole staff or?
Yeah, well, Greeley's got 2 people, one person is dedicated strictly to doing inspections,
Or just construction or the whole program?
for construction inspections. You know, I came from a community, of course, a lot bigger, but we had 6 construction inspectors just for stormwater. And those full-time jobs. So, I was a little surprised when I got here, and I asked Dennis, so can I, borrow one of the construction inspectors to help me with? No, you can't. I was a little shocked.
Well, to Paul's point, we've talked about this before, I think it makes sense to contract service out.
Yeah, there's no.
Like, every indication, things will slow down at some point.
Well, and I know,
Sooner or later.
directly, it impacts the cost of the
Yeah.
home. But, say we got, because, oversight starts to crumble because I'm trying to get all these inspections done and something goes awry, then the cost to the community would be kind of significant if the EPA or the state stepped in and levied a fine against us.
That's why I'm saying with the paperwork being filed correctly, it puts all of that onto Safe Bill.
Right.
And I would think that the homeowner or the home builder is gonna be relieved to know that it's all being done.
Right, and through a process that he's
Yeah.
familiar with. And
Well,
now,
this would never come back on the homeowner.
well,
I
the
meant
home
home
builder.
builder is what I said.
Yeah.
Home builder. I'm disappointed there's only between. I think I understand why Safe Bill can't do that, but. it's either
So there's no financial impact to us?
There-
Because Because in the presentation here, I mean, normally when we're presented with something, there's a financial impact. So, but there was no mention of that, so.
Well, no, there isn't.
So there isn't one, because.
So when we spoke to Safe Build, and I think it was just last week, and because, they're just kind of getting their fee proposal in front of us, I wanted to get this in front of the board right away to get your feedback. And they had the two different options, and because, at least in my mind, this would be something we'd add on to the building permit. This would be a pass-through. The town wouldn't collect any additional money, you know, we wouldn't receive any more, but we wouldn't spend any more. So it'd be a pass-through fee, and it's a question of, if it's a $40 fee, we could pass that through, but I know Janine, she does have a lot of this program to put in. And we're already talking about what are her staffing needs, just not next year, but, you know, kind of out for the next 3 years, where do we need to be? So, and we know that the storm drainage fund definitely could not take this on its own. So right now, in my mind, this would be either we're gonna pass on $40 fee on the building permit, and we're gonna have to figure it out internally how to make up the gap, or we're gonna pass on a $200 fee on the permit. Safe Build will take on this program. That's not to say that we're not gonna have any other staffing needs in stormwater. We just know we're gonna be able to take at least, where Janine is spending about 40% of her time, more or less right now, and let her refocus on other programs.
Shane, when you talk about that the fund can't necessarily tolerate this, is it because of the cash outlay to Safe Build versus?
No, I'm talking about the storm drain fund specifically.
Right.
And so it's just not that robust of a fund.
Sure,
It's pretty, so as we look at.
Is it that delay though between when we cash outlay and when we get reimbursed by the home builder though? I guess is what I'm getting at. Is that what you're worried about, is being able to cover the?
We don't have the money.
I think
We're
it's
not collecting
outside
it.
of this, it's still not robust.
Yeah, I'm just saying that the stormwater fund
That's
itself.
separate kind of conversation.
Yeah, it just has a pretty low fund balance. And so as you take operational and you say, okay, geez, let's put another half staff member, let's do something with it. It's just, it's not sustaining. It's just operationally, it's not sound. So when we look at any budget, so, you know, for the general fund, you know, we kind of take two buckets. We say, operationally, can we run, and I want to make sure that the amount of money we're projecting is going to more than cover the amount of money we're projecting to spend. And then we look at our capital side and all those one-time monies. So I'd say with the storm drain, we're about there. It's just operationally, we really can't take on more of a burden. That's not to say, I mean, maybe 20,000, maybe it could take it on, but I'm telling you, it's pretty razor thin. And I'd suggest that it wouldn't be prudent for us to do that, because we have other obligations and other things we need to do as a community. So if we can directly attribute this to this home right there is why we need this program, it's a little bit easier to say, well, that home there should contribute for the program.
Do we have authority in the ordinances we just adopted to impose a fee? We aren't currently, I think you said. Is the authority there to do it?
There's,
Or will we need a formal action to adopt?
I'll let Ian take that one.
You have the authority to impose a fee, whether it's in the ordinance or not.
Well, I know we would have the authority, but
You would, so we wouldn't need to amend the ordinance to give you the authority to impose a fee, especially a fee that you pass through to a third party.
and it sounds like the minimum fee would end up being 80, because the 40 is for their indicator, but then they're charging 40 for just simply processing the permit. So I'm assuming they would charge you that $40, even if their only obligation was to do the indicator.
If their only obligation was to do the indicator, it would be 40, yes. But to do,
Well, he's referring to the permit intake processing, the plan review estimate.
Right.
That's
Oh,
also 40.
okay.
Would they charge you that too?
Yeah, they're gonna charge us 200.
No. Not if we only ask them to do
Oh,
the,
gotcha.
but I don't know whether they're gonna charge you the processing fee, even if we only ask them to do the indicator.
I gotcha. So you're up to
So
80.
maybe-
I think that's a choice.
Yeah, I believe that it was presented as either 40 or 200. There wouldn't be an additional fee on top of the 40.
She probably has to do the processing.
That's what I said, I was disappointed that there's no in between, it's either 40 or 200.
Well, and I mean, we could, you know, I guess when we were talking to them about it, those were kind of the two. I Safe Build may say, I just think when we start parsing this out, maybe a little bit disjointed, like Janine was saying, like if they've got one part, then we've got another part, there's not really that continuity. So I think as we try to parse it out more, they say, guys, we're either doing it or we're not. You know, it's really, we can't really do these three things and then have you do this thing.
Right.
I think a good follow-up question though is, I think, when David asked about the compliance complaint, I mean, if they don't have any compliance issues with it, is that $40 reimbursed? You know, do they collect it up front? Because I think that is a fair question. I think right now there isn't. I think there is a lot of education, I think, for a lot of these folks, but over time, they are gonna get better and better. And so one can see especially specific builders that are just have it down. So that is a good follow-up question.
I think they've probably calculated 200 on hiring someone to do this, and they probably have to charge a minimum to take this on, so I don't think you're gonna get the rebate. I would offer maybe we pay them 180, figuring they don't need 2 of those inspections, but only 1. But my suspicion is, to make this work for them, they need $200 per lot to hire someone, to train someone.
But I think we should ask. I mean, I think we should go back, I mean, this is a first-time presentation, first go-round with us. You know, and so maybe we go back and say, is there somewhere we can, I mean, we'd like you to take it all, not just, and, you know, is there any way to, I mean, is 200 the bottom line cost, or, because point out some of these things that, you know, you are including in here, this compliance, which may not be on every single one, especially as they continue to go forward. The first 100, Janine may have done, I mean, you know what I mean? God knows
They have cracked the whip well
right,
enough.
and so, you know, the next 100, because, you know, so, I mean, because if you said it takes about an hour, I mean, you're looking at $200 an hour is what we're being charged, right? Or is that total, or is it more than?
We're talking
than
about
that?
8 to 10 inspections. Well, I don't know, I don't think it's quite that much, but when you calculate it's on every single lot.
Might take an hour.
Yeah.
If they took everything, it would take probably an hour per
one
address or however.
Oh,
you-
no.
No? For all of this?
Of the collection of the single lots, yeah. I think it would take about an hour for a group.
Oh, so.
So, and again, so explain to the board, again, if you're a builder, at what point do you have to follow this?
I have, well, oh. at
Yeah,
what
I'm
point
just saying
do-
like the 1 acre and
Oh,
what would
sure.
take them into this?
The rule for what needs to be inspected is 1 acre or more, or it could be less than an acre, but in a common plan of development. So a collection of lots that aren't a whole acre, but in collection, they add up to an acre, within a quarter mile of each other,
Just pretty much everybody.
which is subdivision building.
Unless you're building a single-family home out in the middle of a 10-acre lot.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, Rain Dance, there's 5 or 6 builders out there. I think they're all probably hitting that threshold to do it. But then, so this is where the pricing, like if you have a block where Journey has the entire block, they're pretty efficient, right? They're able to hit all those. In other subdivisions, you may have a builder that just has a couple houses here and a couple a quarter mile away. So I think that's why Safe Built can bring a little of economies to this thing, because that's what they do, the inspections
They're
all
out
the
there
time. What's that?
They're out there all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
time.
and that's really the advantage of them versus having Janine bounce from one subdivision to the other one and trying to keep up. But I think it's really hard for us to parse out and say it's gonna end up being this amount of time per lot, because I don't think it's constant at all, Mayor.
So when you say lot, I'm thinking the footprint per house.
Yes.
Okay, but I heard something about a collection of
So,
So that confused me a little bit.
well, by the permit, this is
Okay.
what needs to be looked at for construction stormwater compliance. Either a project that has 1 acre or more of ground
Okay.
disturbance, or if you're in a larger common plan of development and you have a collection of disturbances.
4 lots per acre.
That within a quarter mile of each other, total an acre.
Okay. Okay.
It could be 1/3 acre lots.
So we can certainly follow through on the compliance complaint question. I think we could also ask them, say, look, could we do this a little bit more à la carte? Could we do everything but the final stabilization, or, just see, if we could parse this out? I think Miles's point is probably right, though. I think they've broken it down for us, but they're not gonna be able to hire a 9/10 inspector.
Right.
And so they're gonna have a certain point where they say, but we can sort of follow through on those two questions. Is there anything else the board would like us to find out from Safe Built, or anything you'd like more detail about? Okay. Okay, awesome, great. All right, thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else on future meetings?
No, we have the much anticipated update from CDOT on the Highway 392 and 257 feasibility study.
We know who's coming?
It'll be Corey from CDOT,
Okay.
and trying to think of, it's their maintenance person and then the consultants.
Okay.
So, and then we have had our transportation master plan folks sitting in on these meetings so they understand what CDOT's found with the feasibility study, so we can make sure our TMP is covering things.
Okay. And then we can give, I guess, better detailed instructions about Labor Day, because we'll find out from Chief exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I could either have, would you like just a detailed report of the weekly update?
Yeah.
Or would you like to just
I mean, I think if you just tell them what we kind of plan, if that will work, like if we kind of plan to kind of maybe stop at about every block, and hopefully we've got, I think I counted last year, there's 13 blocks, so only however many bags of candy I want. This year, we are gonna have candy throughout the end of the parade. I don't care if you guys go through a block and you disperse it all halfway through, then the rest of that block is SOL. I'm not gonna leave those folks who stand at that Catholic church empty-handed another year.
And that's up.
We were on here last year.
Let's walk in.
Well,
We have stickers to hang that.
Well, I think mine.
I am so sorry for being too generous.
I think part of the issue is.
You were eating it. You were eating
It seems to get longer.
I had a piece of
Seems
gum.
like-
Well, no, but I've counted out every year, and it's because, people do, because last year, I'd throw, and then somebody else would throw, the same kids would get 2 or 3 times, not just from other people, but from us.
I gave you credit. I pointed at you and I said, the mayor just gave you 5 pieces of candy.
I've seen this. I drove the truck one year. And yeah, it's all gone by the time you
I know.
get 6 blocks down.
Why don't we go the opposite direction every other?
That's right.
Start at the other end.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. I don't think that's gonna happen.
We'd have a secret stash in that last.
Just so
block
you all
and
know,
park on
I
the
will
side
not
street.
be here next Monday for your meeting. Kim is going to be covering for me, so I'm out next week.
Again?
Slacker.
Yes, again.
Gee.
Okay, good.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
So,
Nothing else, just down.
Okay, well,